Welcome to Understanding the Bible with Pastor Stephen. This is Season 4, Episode 28, Persecution. Now, the definition of persecution is the systematic and cruel mistreatment of an individual or group based on their religion, their race, their political belief, or another characteristic. It involves inflicting suffering and harm or oppression upon someone who is different than you in some way. Now, the first level of persecution that I would say most Americans are familiar with is kind of that high school mentality that I was picked on because of my looks. I was picked on because I was short. I was picked on because I'm a nerd or whatever. Being laughed at, having books knocked out of your hand, not having friends, maybe even chased and knocked down. That's the point of that is this first level of persecution for being a Christian is very minor, and it's the high school mentality of being picked on. I'm not saying that this is the type of persecution talked about in the Bible. I don't think it is, but it gives you a taste of what it's like for people to despise you, to mock you because you're a follower of Christ. And that's not that big of a deal. It doesn't take much to get over that when you're talking about your feelings got hurt. Okay? We should, as adults, have the character to get past that. We should, as adults, be instilling that character in our children. That it doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't matter what other people say. You need to be courageous, bold as a lion. You need to be strong in the Lord. You need to not fear what other people say about you. And what we're going to talk about today is the next level of persecution that gets more severe. Let's get into it. The next level of persecution, I kind of am not an expert on this, but I labeled it as 3 different levels. The first one is that high school mentality. Oh, I just got picked on. You're not really persecuted, okay? It's uncomfortable. It's not nice. But the second level is more severe, where it becomes violent. And I look at the Kristallnacht, the Nazi era Night of Glass, where it was orchestrated. It was presented as a spontaneous outburst of public rage, but it was carried out and orchestrated by the Nazi Party's paramilitary forces, the SS, the SA, Hitler Youth, the brown shirts. And then, of course, they got mobs of people and civilians involved, and it became a big thing. But Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, gave the order for the attacks to appear as spontaneous demonstrations. Hundreds of synagogues were burned. Firefighters were specifically instructed to not put out the flames, just prevent the fire from spreading to Aryan properties. So looting, vandalizing, shop windows shattered, which is why it was called the Night of Broken Glass. Homes, schools, hospitals, cemeteries vandalized, that sort of thing. And interestingly enough, that sounds a lot like the Democrat Party today and what they do with the BLM and the orchestrated riots and busing people in, and the Soros organizations funding things, and the Antifa and all this other stuff that you see going on. I mean, heck, it's even what they did with January 6th, where they orchestrated it and they brought people in, and the FBI, the government, just like Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister. I mean, there's a lot of similarities here to make it look like it was spontaneous demonstrations. But anyways, I digress. We're not talking politics. We're talking about Christians being persecuted, orchestrated persecution because of your Christianity and what the Bible says about it. So you may lose your job. You may lose your career. You may be forced to move to another location. But this second level of persecution is where property is damaged or taken from you and you fear for your safety. And then, of course, we have the third level of persecution, which is Jesus level, torture and death. And yeah, that happens today too. Let's take a look at the Old Testament. Obviously, national persecution was allowed against the nation of Israel when they forsook God and worshiped other gods, demons, whatever. And so God allowed other nations to come in and harm them and destroy them and take them from their homes. But you had personal persecution of the prophets. because they demonstrated their faith, because people knew they were followers of the Most High God. I think of Elijah in the cave where he's crying out to God in 1 Kings 19, saying, I'm the only one left, God. And God's like, no, you're not. Hold on. I've got 3,000 other people just like you. But then you have Job, persecuted because of his faith, and he didn't even realize that was happening. We know the story that it was God allowing Satan to persecute him because of his faith. That was the reason all the bad things were happening. So you have spiritual persecution. Then you have persecution of whole people groups. Remember the whole book of Esther? The whole point was I forget what they were called, the leaders of the nation at the time were actually picking out the Jews only because they didn't like Mordecai, Esther's uncle. Didn't like Mordecai, so they picked all the people that were had the same skin color and looked like him, and they were just going to genocidally massacre every one of them. And then Esther stepped in and ended up, doing her thing with the king and saving the Israelites because she was an Israelite as well, and the king didn't know it and loved her and thought she was beautiful, and but the persecution of the whole people group because one guy who looked like a Jew, I mean he was, but would refuse to bow down. And the leaders of that country decided, because we don't like that guy, we're going to kill all of his people. That's persecution on that third level. Torture and death, right? But let's look at what the New Testament says. I want to pull up some specific Bible verses because I want to relate this to present day and where persecution is going on and what to expect and what to do when you're faced with it. Jesus, of course, was persecuted, but he told us that we'll be persecuted too. If you look at what Jesus said in Matthew 5, verse 10, he said, "Blessed are they that have been persecuted for righteousness' sake," not because you're short, but because you're righteous, "for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men shall reproach you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake." So when people lie about you, for whose sake? For the sake of Jesus Christ. So they find out you're a Christian and they start spreading lies about you. They try and persecute you and harm you. Verse 12, "Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets that were before you." So you could stop right there and you could say, hey, Jesus said you're going to be persecuted. When you're persecuted for being righteous, when you're persecuted for Jesus, rejoice and be happy because you are building up treasures in heaven. You are just like the prophets when that happens. Then we look at what the disciples said. Look at Paul in 2 Corinthians 11, starting in verse 24. He's listing some of the persecutions that he went through. "Of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one." So as a Roman citizen, you couldn't be whipped 40 times because that could potentially kill you. So the worst they would do to a Roman citizen was whip you 39 times. He had that happen 5 times to him. Guarantee you he was near death each time. "Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I've been in the ocean. In journeyings often, in perils of rivers, in perils of robbers, in perils from my own countrymen, in perils from the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, deceivers, liars among the people that claim to be Christians," right? "In labor and travail, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Besides those things that are without, there is that which presseth upon me daily, anxiety for all the churches." So I'm not going to go into each one of those, but the fact is Paul was persecuted specifically because he was telling the truth and talking about Jesus Christ being raised from the dead. And that one about false brethren really gets me too, because people always complain about the churches. Oh, there's hypocrites in the churches. That's why I don't go to church and blah, blah, blah. That's what a false brethren is, right? Paul, in the first century, faced that. So that's not a reason for you not to go to church. Paul handled it. He faced it. He dealt with it. Just deal with it. But I want you to see how all the disciples ended up dying. This is that third level of persecution where it's torture and death. Simon Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross. James, the son of Zebedee, was beheaded by King Herod. John, his brother, reportedly survived persecution. He was attempted to be killed 3 times. If you read the Roman historian Josephus, they tried to boil him alive in oil. They tried to thrust him through with a sword. They tried to burn him at the stake, and nothing worked. So they banished him to the Isle of Patmos, and he died of natural causes there. Philip, some accounts say he was crucified, others say he was stoned to death. Bartholomew was flayed alive. His skin was cut from his body, and then he was beheaded. Thomas was stabbed to death with a spear in India. Matthew was possibly stabbed to death in Ethiopia. We don't have confirmation of him. James was beaten with a club and then stoned to death. Jude was killed with an axe. Simon the Zealot was sawn in half. Now, some ancient writings say otherwise, so we're not 100% sure on that one. And then, of course, Judas Iscariot hanged himself after betraying Jesus. But the point is, the disciples faced torture and death like Jesus did. So what does the Bible say about promise to future Christians, which would be us, 2,000 years later, right? John 15:18. If the world hateth you, you know that it hath hated me before it hated you. This is Jesus Christ talking. Hey, the world hates me. It's okay when they hate you because you already know about me. It's going to happen, right? Verse 19. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you, a servant is not greater than his Lord. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. That's pretty clear. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, that you need to expect to be hated, that you no longer belong in this world, and they will despise you and persecute you. You have to expect that. And we need to teach this so people understand that the life of a Christian is not supposed to be easy. 2 Timothy 3:12 says, yea, and all that would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. Now it gets worse because look at the persecution that those disciples faced. Jesus faced. At the beginning when they wrote these words, they were kicked out of synagogues. They were chased out of cities. They had thrown stone at them when they had stones thrown at them when they were in crowds preaching. So serious persecution to the threat of their life, right? They had not yet suffered that ultimate torture and death like Jesus did when they did these writings. So they're in that second level of persecution saying, hey, it's going to happen to you too. And then we have the promise to the end times Christians, those who survive until the end, those Christians who happen to be there when Jesus comes back during the 7-year tribulation, or 3.5 years, however you want to look at it. Matthew 24:9, Jesus says, then shall they deliver you up unto tribulation and shall kill you. And you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many stumble and shall deliver up one another and shall hate one another. It's not going to be easy in the end times either. And many false prophets shall arise and shall lead many astray. Go back to that verse 19 or verse 10. Matthew 24:10. And then shall many stumble and shall deliver up one another and shall hate one another. Think about that. When you're being tortured and killed, many will stumble. That means in the faith, where they lose a little bit of faith. They do things that are wrong, like the prodigal son, and they make mistakes. They sin. And shall deliver up one another and shall hate one another. Remember what Paul did before he became Paul? His name was Saul. He hunted Christians and killed them. He went with soldiers. He was part of the Sanhedrin. and he went around hunting down the Christ followers. Remember, the first act of Saul was to hold the coats as Stephen was being stoned to death. He's saying, when they come for you, don't be one who gives up your Christian brothers and sisters to be tortured and killed just to escape the slaughter or to have a quick death. Some Christians will be tortured and will give up their fellow Christians just to end the torture. That's what this is saying in the end times here. Verse 12, and because iniquity shall be multiplied, the love of the many shall wax cold. But he that endureth to the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world for a testimony unto all the nations, and then shall the end come. Now, I'm not going to get into the rapture here. Only, I guess I am, briefly. There is no rapture here. You are going to live through the end times and be tortured and killed, and some of you will give up others so that you don't have to die or so to end the torture or whatever. This is what will happen in the end times, and if you survive until the end, then you will be saved. And I don't mean spiritually, because I believe that as a Christian, once you become a follower of Jesus Christ, you are grasped in his hand and no man can take you out of his hand, okay? I'm not saying that. But I believe that what that means is that when Jesus comes back and annihilates the Antichrist and binds him for 1,000 years, if you survived until then, you will have that new body and you will be saved physically. Then you look at Revelation 20, verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and such as worshipped not the beast nor his image, and received not the mark upon their forehead and upon their hand. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Two key points here. Number one, it clearly says during this tribulation period, when the mark of the beast is being put on the forehead and hands of people, these are the people who were beheaded, lost their life for Jesus, for refusing to take the mark. That's what verse 4 says. So John saw these people come back to life, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. That's the first thing. There will be persecution of believers of Jesus Christ to the point that you will be beheaded during those 7 years, during that tribulation when the Antichrist is reigning on the earth. After that, you will be brought back to life and you will reign with Christ 1,000 years. That's what Revelation 20 verse 4 says. Then you look at verse 5. The rest of the dead lived not until the 1,000 years should be finished. This is the first resurrection. That's why I said what I did about the rapture. There is no rapture of dead saints until this first rapture, the very first resurrection. And what is it referencing? It says, verse 5, this is the first resurrection. What resurrection? What is this referring to? The verse before, where it said they lived. So who lived? Who was resurrected this first time? Who is the first resurrection of believers around the world? Only those who were beheaded for not taking the mark of the beast in their forehead and their hands. So the first resurrection is at the end of the 7-year tribulation, when those who were persecuted to death are raised to live with Christ 1,000 years during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. That's huge. The point is, on this earth, until Christ reigns for 1,000 years in Jerusalem, we will face persecution up to the point of death. Now, what are we going to do about it? So I want to cover that on the next one. Take hope in the fact that If you are martyred for Christ, there is a reward for you in heaven. If you are martyred for Christ during the 7-year reign of the Antichrist, there's a 1,000-year reward for you here on earth, reigning with Christ as kings and judges on the earth. That's got some amazing implications. Very cool stuff. If you want to dive deep into that, go back and listen to my episodes on the book of Revelation. Amazing stuff if you dig deep into that. But thank you for listening. Please tune into part 2 on persecution, on how to deal with it, and some real world examples of what is going on against Christians, followers of Jesus Christ. So take heart. If you're interested in some of those stories, the Fox's Book of Martyrs is huge. There's a couple other books. I'll bring those up on the next episode. So thank you for listening. And until next time, keep searching for truth. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Sure appreciate your time. And even more than that, I appreciate you sharing this with people who may actually need it. So when there are different things that you hear, share that particular podcast. And if you can, like it on whatever social media you're listening to, comment on it. All of that really helps this podcast and helps it get out. The algorithm with all of social media really gets tripped by interaction. So if you can do that, that's great. And if you're interested in actually contributing to this podcast and keeping it going financially, please, please, please support me on Spotify. I've got a thing on there for $5 a month that you can do those automatic supports, or you can contact me and do Venmo or something like that. Not that I'm asking for money. I will always do this podcast for free, but the subscriptions do help. And it's nice to be able to have some money trickling in now and then to where I can pay for things for the podcast and help support my family. So thank you all for listening. It's great to have listeners who interact, who ask questions, who email me. And keep in mind, I will always personally respond. You can email me at angrypatriot42@yahoo.com if you have any questions or ideas for a podcast, and I will definitely respond to you. And if you want, I'll put you on the email list so that every week you get an email of the podcast. Anyways, thanks again, guys. Appreciate your time. You have a great day.